Meet Lily. It's nearly 9 p.m. and she's still at the office. Her desk buried under reports, and her laptop screen glows with unread emails. The office is quiet now. Her coworkers long gone, but Lily feels compelled to stay. Her phone buzzes with a text message from her husband. "I'm heading to bed. Miss you. Let's catch up tomorrow?" Lily sighs as she reads the message. The guilt twists in her chest, but she brushes it aside. There's no time to dwell on it. She has a quarterly presentation to finalize, dozens of team concerns to address, and a lingering sense that the day never really ends. As a senior VP of a software development company, Lily has poured everything into her career. But lately, she's begun to question what everything is costing her. Her work used to be so exciting, but now it feels like it's always just draining her. Her team is stretched thin, and they look to her for solutions that she can't always provide. The lack of resources frustrates her, but her perfectionism leads her to overcompensate, where she's taking on more and more responsibility that should either be shared or delegated. At home, things aren't much better. Her semi-retired husband, who's very supportive, wants more time with his wife, but Lily feels so depleted at times that she can't even engage. Her kids, who are all grown up, have careers of their own, have said to her many times that she needs to take a break. Last time she spoke with her son, he had such concern in his voice when he said, "Mom, you're always working." Lily knows that it can't keep going like this, and she dreams of a time where she can be more deliberate with her time and be able to protect her evenings and distribute the work amongst her team so it doesn't fall all on her shoulders, and to be able to build an environment where people feel empowered and supported. Most importantly, she wants to be happy. Her husband has said to her many times she doesn't need to work. She could retire, but she feels like she has more to give. So she's stuck between wanting to have more time with her husband, but to not give up on her career. Today, I'm speaking with Becky Wolfe, leadership consultant and burnout prevention expert who's dedicated her career to helping leaders like Lily. Becky's approach is to focus on creating high-functioning teams, fostering collaboration, and ensuring leaders protect their personal well-being without compromising productivity. And I'm excited to hear Becky's strategies on how to help Lily, or anyone for that matter, to find balance, to build resilience, and to thrive both at work and at home. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. All right, so Becky, I'm excited to get into Lily's story, but I want to start with your story first. So you have this career in healthcare. You worked in cardiology for many years. And then I heard you say, or I read that you said that you are a coach to the core. And I got curious as to when you came to that realization that coaching was your mission, to be a health and leadership coach.
Yeah. As you mentioned, so I started my career as a PA, so physician assistant, and most of my career is spent in cardiology. There was one profound patient that I came across, Jay, that was just so impactful. And that's when I knew it was the thing I needed to be doing. It was the compelling pivot that I needed to make. So I've been in my career at that point for probably 2 to 3 years, honestly. It was a short time frame getting into cardiology, and knew I wanted to jump into health coaching because we were trying to find solutions for patients to get them off medications, lose weight, all the things. They were just asking the 3 recurrent questions to me: how do I lose weight? How do I get off medications? How do I get healthy? And we would send them to dietitians, not a lot of change. I mean, they would get 1 to 2 sessions potentially with insurance that was getting covered. and just felt so frustrated by that we were doing a disservice to patients. So found a way around it, became a health coach, started a program for my practice, and where I was able to coach patients after hours. And I fell in love with coaching then. And then 6 months into coaching, had a patient come back to see the regular cardiologist. And I'll never forget the moment. My cardiologist, my doc that I was working with, came out to get me. And he said, "Hey, Mr. Smith in room 4 wants to see you. Will you go back and see him?" And I was an hour behind in patients at that point. Went back, sat down, and was like, take a deep breath. I took this like a big sigh. I'm like, "All right, how are you?" Just sat down like I normally would with my patients. And he said, "Hey, I want you to know that you listened to me." And I'm like, "Okay." And he's like, "No, no, no." He's like, "What you're doing really matters." And I'm like, "I see patients every day. Like, I don't understand." I'm like over my head, completely not even understanding what he's talking about. And he said, "Becky, I've lost 35 pounds. I'm off all my medicines but one, and you're the only person that listened to me."
Wow.
And I know it was so profound. I was like, this is what I need to be doing. This is the thing I want to do. And I knew at that moment, I think that comment that I had made, it was, I am a coach to the core. Like, I just love helping people transition or be who they want to be and who they know ultimately they can be. So that was the big pivotal moment that I knew I had to start making my way towards coaching.
Wow. So
Mm.
what I'm pulling from that story is him feeling heard by you and you actively listening was a big reason why he saw results. I guess over time, what else do you feel has been the things that allow for you to be an effective coach? What are some of the things that you feel that you do with your clients that allows for them to have those kind of transformations in addition to actively
Mhm.
listening?
Yeah. So I think listening is a huge part of it. I think it's also mirroring back to them what they know to be true about themselves. Right.
Mm,
So I believe people have a vision for their life and where they want it to go. It's just pulling it out of them, letting them see that you see it too,
yeah.
and then helping them just take active steps towards it. I think that's been the most powerful thing is like I get to empower them. I get to actually show them who they are in real life. Um, so those empowering moments of like they're right. They just need somebody who believes like they do.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that effective coaching, Becky, is holding up the mirror for people, for them to see the things that they're missing, the things that, to see it at an angle that they weren't seeing it on their own, and then trusting that when they see it, they'll
Mm.
know what to do to be able to improve their situation.
Yes. Yes. I agree with that. So it's highlighting the strengths that they know, they inherently know that they have. It's just
Yeah.
nobody has been there pointing it out to them, I think. So it's the ability just to like, nope, you're right. I see this too. So how are you demonstrating that and pushing them more towards their strengths and just allowing them to step into their true ability?
Yeah. And I know that you do a lot of work on burnout. You write about burnout, you post about burnout.
Mhm.
And I find that those who do are often doing so because they had experiences of burnout themselves. They or at least overworking, right? Did you have that kind of experience in your career?
So I think burnout for me happened, and I think that's what pushed me towards health coaching, honestly, Jay, because for me, it was mostly the disservice of seeing patients being treated chronically for illness I knew we could cure.
Mm,
So really pushing them towards preventative care. So treating high blood pressure, not with medication, but with diet, with exercise, with habit change. That needed to be done large scale, and I could see it, and I couldn't do anything about it until I became a health coach. So for me, that was the shift that I could see needing to be made. But there was like a mismatch in my values as far as how I was practicing medicine and what I believed to be true. So for me, I think that was the larger picture of what really caused burnout for me. I'm like, I could see this big picture of what we're missing here. Nobody else sees it yet, but I could see it. And I'm like, I can't practice medicine this way if I'm not effective in really helping people. But yes, to your point, I did experience burnout. And I think wellness and health has always been a big part of who I am. But I needed to practice medicine very differently. So for me, it's a strategic advantage or strategic point of view in helping healthcare practices help their leaders get healthy, their physicians, their PAs, nurse practitioners, whoever, get them really healthy because then they help the patients. So I think it just had to change in order for me to be my healthiest and best.
Yeah. And it's as though we fall into this pattern of we keep doing things and we keep acting and we're putting so much energy and we're not seeing any change, we're not seeing a result, we're not seeing anything come back from it. And I think that that's oftentimes one of the factors of burnout. And how do you define it? What is your definition of burnout, and what are the things that you think contribute towards it?
Yeah. So there's three characteristics of burnout. So there's cynicism or depersonalization. So where like work doesn't really matter as much anymore. You're kind of just going through the motions to what you just had mentioned. There's emotional exhaustion. And there's actually decreased professional efficacy. So we're not feeling like we're doing a really good job at the work that we're doing, that we've been really successful in doing before. So it's complicated. I will say that because each person's definition and how they come to that realization is different. There's different scales and surveys we can use, but I just think it's so complex, to be quite honest with you. And it's not related completely or entirely to work. I think if we define it in that way, it's a mismatch or it's not helpful for the human. Because if you think about all of the elements for people, it is like we have home lives, we have community lives, like we have all these things we're doing, and we have work. So we have to join all of that because it's not really helpful just to put people in a box of having burnout at work when home life could be really stressful and difficult too.
Yeah. What I often refer to that as no one leaves life to go to work, no one
Mhm.
leaves work to go to life. And so we have to have a holistic picture of the demands and how we're working through them. And you have a few phases that you've written about of how anyone can manage through burnout. And there was a word that you used there that I think is in that article, but you term it as self-efficacy.
Mhm.
So can you define that? What is self-efficacy, and how does that support those who could be falling into that spiral of burnout?
Yeah. Yeah. So self efficacy is really the ability to understand what we need. I think often you had mentioned this earlier too. We just kind of go through the same cycles, kind of unbeknownst to ourselves sometimes that we're just
Yeah.
continually going through them. And self efficacy really is we have a deep understanding of who we are, what we need, and then we
Mm,
can voice it to others. So, to some degree, setting the boundaries that we need, becoming really healthy ourselves,
yeah.
and then just being as efficient as we can be with the roles that we play. So, super complicated, but it really does help. And it goes way deeper than self care. It is really managing ourselves as efficiently as possible.
Yeah. There's an
Mhm.
aspect of self-knowledge there, isn't
Mhm.
there? Like, in other words, we have to have this awareness of when we are feeling out of alignment, disconnected, and to be able to clearly identify why. And I think that so often burnout happens because we didn't recognize it early on. We didn't recognize it where we could have avoided it being something that we kept allowing to continue over and over and over again. So there's a self knowing, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So, self awareness, I think, first key thing that we need to understand, right? Of like who we are, what tendencies we may have that might perpetuate burnout. Getting to know those a lot faster. That way, just as you mentioned, we break the cycle. We're not letting ourselves get to it. Because there's several cognitive problems that happen when we are
Yeah.
experiencing burnout. So we don't have high executive functioning. We have inattention happens. Just like there's some significant problems and errors that can happen as a result of burnout. So we have to get better at understanding what those tendencies and triggers are for ourselves. So the deeper self awareness in order for us not to let it happen. So it is a mechanism in which we are just, again, more effective later on, but it really does start with us being really aware of our tendencies.
Yeah. Well, the way you describe that, there's the trigger of something that is stressful, creates chronic stress or anxiety, and then you said executive functioning can shut down. So not only is it something where we are dealing with disruptive emotions and we're not in a great place, but it also affects our productivity and our performance, doesn't it?
Yes, that's correct. So neurologically, the amygdala actually gets a little bit bigger. So the fear and aggression center of the brain actually gets a little bit bigger, and the prefrontal cortex actually gets a little bit smaller or thinner. So that's where the executive functioning logic portion of the brain actually is engaged. So when that gets smaller, we're actually more emotional because the amygdala is taking over. So one of my
Mm.
favorite books I read when my kids were small was The Whole Brain Child, and it describes this. But it really is this fantastic book that describes like when your kids go into this emotional state, it's the amygdala that hijacks the system. And it's the same
Yeah.
thing when we're going into burnout. It's just the amygdala is more pronounced. So we have to be able to alter that. So tap into the emotion that's actually happening and then find our way back to logics. And the coaching that we do, it really is largely identifying what's happening here, what's going on in your body, what's happening in your life that's causing you stress right now or frustration or fear, whatever it might be. And then we've got to create the stimuli. We have to kind of create the pause, and then the action has to be different in order for the behavior to change.
Yeah. So the other day, Becky, I was at my daughter's basketball game. And I'll tell you the story because it's so related to what you said. And I've been thinking about it. So I'm at her basketball game. Now she's one of the younger girls, so she doesn't get a lot of playing time. It's junior high. So she's starting to get used to a traveling team and so on. So I'm at the game because I want to be at every game I can. Even if she's not playing much, I want to be there and to support her. And she's on the bench, and then the game ends up being where they have a huge lead, and the coach puts her in the game. And she clearly wasn't ready for it. Okay, so she was very nervous. I could tell. I'm watching her get on the court. She was very, very nervous. She gets on the court and she starts making a lot of mistakes, and stuff I know she knows. Because I've gone through what to do when you get the ball and how to be able to consider the three options of passing and dribbling or shooting, and she's just panicking. And what I was thinking through afterwards was her amygdala got triggered. She was just in her fight or flight, and she could not even access her ability to think through things calmly and perform at a high level. And this is what happens to us as adults.
It's all the same, right? It's just our prefrontal cortexes are a little bit larger as we get older, but it is the same, right? It is
It's the
exactly the same.
same. And so there's some, I guess, intervention there, what we have to do in terms of tools that we can use or strategies. So what are the things that you recommend, Lily, to people? And I know that every person's unique, so it's not going to be always the same, but how can one be able to more easily recognize that pattern and be able to avoid it being something that leads to burnout?
Mhm. Yeah. So I don't know how often you use personality assessments. I use them fairly often with clients because it just gives them baseline language. So that's the only thing I'm trying to do is give you baseline language based on how you're wired, what you might notice or bump into. And then what I notice is it starts to expand for people of what they recognize. They're like, oh my goodness, I recognize when I'm in this situation, this happens. And other people have told me this happened. So when you get a little bit of baseline awareness for people, it really does help them expand and grow much faster. So that's the first thing I'll often do. Core values is another exercise that I'll often do with people because, again, it's when there's a mismatch of core values, it can be really enlightening for them to understand they might be stepping over them in order to function at a job or not have appropriate boundaries at home potentially. So it really is allowing them to just get some baseline language and understanding of what they need.
Hmm. So is there a specific personality assessment that you use? Is there one that's like your go-to?
Yeah, I have a couple. So I use five voices, and this is more stuff I'm working with an organization or a team because it
Okay.
scales and people understand it a little bit so they can understand who's on the team with them. It's based off Myers-Briggs. So I know Myers-Briggs fairly well. And the cognitive functions and behaviors based on those personality assessments.
Okay. Yeah, and I think I saw it's on your website too, where, there's that stigma that some people have about personality assessments, right? It's like, oh, what's the point of all this? There's so many different ones out there. But if you approach it with the desire to just learn more about yourself and your natural tendencies, you can get a lot out of it. I feel like I have in being able to recognize my strengths as well as what I often term potential pitfalls. I don't know the word weaknesses. It's just a potential pitfall. Like I could fall into this tendency for mine, for example, people pleasing could be a tendency I can easily fall into. So one of the things that happens in Lily's story, I wanted to ask you about because I know you work with leaders quite
Mhm.
often, And Lily is based off of an actual client, and as many of these stories are. And so the person of whom I'm referencing, the one thing that I know she struggled with was feeling responsible for
Mm,
everybody else, because
yep.
she was the kind of person, and is the kind of person, where if they have limited resources and her team feels like they're under stress, she wants to do everything she can to
Mhm.
support them, to not let them down, even if it means working late hours, even if it means draining herself. So, how
Mhm.
do you work with someone like Lily who feels like that responsibility to put in all those extra hours to make sure that she takes care of everybody else?
Yeah, yeah. I usually validate them first because their hearts are so pure and good and they want to help and support. And I know that. So I want to validate that because it is so good to see leaders that are like that, right? We want leaders who feel the sense of responsibility deeply because we can't change people's character sometimes. I can help mold and kind of help with a little bit of awareness sometimes, but their deep character, the deep sense that's already there, it is so pure and good. So in Lily's case, I kind of will shed light on your team wants to grow. How are you helping them grow? Because the challenge piece of that can be missing is incredibly important for the team not to get stifled in their own energy and growth. So usually when you shed some light onto that, there's this opening of awareness of like, oh my goodness, so I could be actually holding them back. I feel responsibility to help them grow too. So it's this a little bit of a mindset shift that takes place that can be really helpful with leaders who feel that sense of responsibility initially.
Yeah. I often frame this as the superhero or the captain. So think of a superhero. The superhero swoops in and is trying to save everybody, and they feel responsible for protecting all of society. Now, while that, again, the superhero is coming from a great place, the superhero is exhausted at the end of the day. Superhero doesn't have much going on outside of their superhero work, right? It's not fun to be the superhero. Now, the captain, think of the captain of a ship, walks onto the dock and or walks onto the center of the ship. I forget the name of it, but you know what I mean. And watches as everybody is doing their job, different sections of the ship, checks in, makes sure that everything is functioning fine. But they got themselves a cup of coffee, cup of tea, pretty relaxed, knowing that everyone's doing their job. And we want to be the captain. You don't want to be the superhero.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's a great way to look at it. Imagery is everything. It's a
Yeah.
great way to picture the differences between the two.
Yeah, yeah. It's just a fun way of doing it. It's such a common thing, Becky. I just see so many people who are in leadership positions for the right reasons because they care and they're passionate, and they fall into this trap so often. And I know that, of course, Becky, it's there's multiple factors, right? We have the individual who is the leader, and then we have also the organization where there could be some systemic flaws. And so how do we address that? Like, okay, so Lily can do everything within her power, and she will, let's say. And there could be some things that need to be addressed within the organization where it's creating an environment where people feel like they have to work that late and they're limited in resources. So how do we address the organizational component of this?
Yeah, that's a difficult thing to manage, right? So I think that that's the harder nut to crack in some cases. I think what's helped is like helping Lily understand that she's responsible for her area, the morale in her area, the leadership in her area as best that she can be. So really focusing on the locus of control. When they do, um, leaders have a lot higher of influence, so their influence grows when they're really focused on their energy on what they're in control of and the actual region of the organization. So I'll often direct their attention back there. And when they go speak in groups of other leaders and they bring up the one thing, usually have a reputation that carries through. So the influence really starts to play out. So I usually direct their attention, honestly, back to their individual department and who they're leading, and then seeing how that they can manage the stressors there and then continue to grow their influence.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about the foundational component of psychological safety. I've heard you discuss this. I know how you recognize this as a necessary part of any culture where people are able to thrive and perform in high demand environments. So talk to me a little bit about psychological safety from your perspective.
Yeah. So, from my perspective, it's the ability for anybody to come into a situation, feel completely fine, to say what they need to say with respect, obviously. So, there are some boundaries with how communication happens, but it's the ability to come in and be vulnerable, be honest, just share what you need to share in a space where you're not concerned about retribution. You're not concerned about losing your job. You're just able to come in and have conversations. So, in these types of environments, you can tell that there's high trust because you're able to have conflict that goes well. People actually feel like you're for them despite having hard conversations.
Hmm.
Um, so I think it's hard to establish, but once it's there, it is so effective and healthy for the organization to thrive and grow.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you see in organizations that do have this right? What are some of the
Yeah.
common traits, Becky, in groups that do have psychological safety and trust?
Yeah. So I see a lot of reliability. I see loyalty. I see, so just some of the common characteristics. I see this, we will often say we see this mentality of the other person being for others, not for themselves. They really strive to be for caring about the other individual more than they're caring about necessarily their needs. But it is, and it's not the same as not caring about your needs. It's just caring about the other person enough to have a hard conversation or enough to be able to hear something vulnerable from the other person. So trustworthiness, loyalty, just the spirit of like I care about you, I'm for you. Like it's safe here, and I think you can feel it. It's hard to define sometimes, but when you're involved in organizations like that, there's definitely a different feel to them.
Well, I love what you're saying because when I am safe,
Mhm.
I don't feel threatened, then I don't need to think about me so much, right?
Yep,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
right, and it's just a natural thing. I think because I think every person, for the most part, most people have that innate quality within them that they want to be of service to others. They want to help
Right.
others. They really do. When they're in an environment where they feel safe. When you don't feel safe, then you feel like, hey, I have to protect me. So what I'm saying, what I'm hearing you say is the environment has to be one where it's not that you're kind of forcing people to stop thinking about themselves. It's that the environment itself makes it where one doesn't need to. So you naturally then start to care about the people around you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the self-preservation goes down. You don't have to put walls up, right? So there's a level already, a degree of trust. So you don't have to protect yourself. It is just one where you can walk in being secure in who you are. You're confident, you're humble, you're walking in, and you don't have to prove anything to anybody. You don't have to um, hide anything. It's just like you get to walk in and be who you are and know that you're contributing to your best and highest.
Yeah. So we have, of course, let's say a leader who can step into a group and be self knowing, be vulnerable, be themselves. And I think that's one way in which they can contribute towards psychological safety.
Yeah.
Now, what if it was, let's say you had this group and you could facilitate some of that? What are ways
Mhm.
in which you find really are useful to be able to
Mhm.
open up that sense of trust amongst teams?
Yeah. So I think sharing experiences has helped.
Okay.
So if I'm going into an organization for the first time, I'll have them share something about themselves. Usually it's something small, like a favorite childhood memory or something tiny that they can start to kind of break the walls down. And then with the content that we use, it really is the ability for them to understand components of trust, components of other people's personalities. Um, Understanding how to communicate even more effectively. But all of these things, when you look at it from somebody else's perspective on how they see the world, it can be really helpful. So just, gaining insight into how people are and just allowing people to have the space to talk. So when I'm facilitating, it really is, I'll throw a question out, allow people to answer from their perspective because we're all a little bit different. I'll share something of my side of things because I'm a little bit out of the box with things sometimes. But it is just allowing people to know that it's okay. Like I can create the safe space because
Yeah.
all are welcome. Nothing's, nothing's off the table. We can talk about, um, within the context of the facilitated conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
it's mirroring what you said to me at the beginning of this conversation, what that
Hmm.
gentleman said to you about feeling
Yeah.
heard.
Yeah.
People want to be heard. And if people feel
Hmm.
heard, they feel understood, they feel then safe, and then they will hopefully then feel connected to one another. I wanted to ask you a little bit about resilience. And I just know that this is something you often speak on, and the word gets thrown around a lot, right, Becky? I mean, I hear the word resilience all the time. And I guess sometimes it's spoken about and it's just like a nice word that organizations use without like any specific strategy or ways in which people can actually cultivate it. So how can anyone, like someone like Lily, how could anyone cultivate more resilience to be able to adapt and adjust to when things don't always go the way you wanted them to?
Yeah. So in Lily's case, I think when we have the ability to sit down with clients and really hear their story, so the story of, why she was really interested in doing the work that she's doing, even, to some extent of why it wasn't as exciting to her anymore. She was starting to notice she was losing a little bit of steam. So it's helping people understand them at their best. Like, tell me a time when you were at your best. Like, tell me a time when things were humming along, you felt really healthy, confident, secure. Tell me about that. And then tell me about a time when you were under extreme stress. Is that now? Like, really just getting clear on what that looks like and then how they manage through it. So, resilience is the ability to adapt mentally, emotionally, behaviorally in situations that are causing high levels of stress. So when we can have people see the dichotomy of health versus when they're under extreme stress, we can start to help them rebuild faster. So it is, again, the tendency awareness of like what's happening during the time of high stress and the ability just to, oh, wait a second, that's me under stress. It's not me at my healthiest and best. So your brain will actually pick up on it much faster once you start to notice the triggers for it.
Yeah.
And I always say, I'm like, I want people to understand, like, when you were at your healthiest, this is what you looked like. So give them a really good representation of what that looks like.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Using real evidence, real
Mhm.
examples, right,
Yeah.
of their from their
Yep.
life. What are there any things that you do, Becky, personally? Like, do you have a daily practice or some things that you use to be able to manage through when you're dealing with high demand? Because I'm sure stress impacts your life as well.
Yes. Yeah. There is no human alive that doesn't experience stress. And I think that
Right.
gives me a lot of peace, honestly, because we're
Yeah.
all managing through something, right?
Yeah.
So I think practices for me that are really helpful, I would say journaling is a practice that I go to again and again. And I've gotten better at asking myself questions if I'm under stress of, hey, what's going on here? Like, why are you experiencing stress? What elements are you noticing? Because there's family stress, work stress, there's, a bunch of different dynamics. So getting clear on what stress looks like and why it's happening. And then, is there anything I can do differently? Or am I not taking care of myself? Am I not sleeping appropriately? Am I not eating well? Have I not exercised in a couple of days? Because there's different practices that I have that make me healthy. And if I've
Mm.
skipped those and compromised for work or in compromised to be with my family, then it's okay. Like, I recognize this could be why I'm off or I'm not feeling my best. So that is different for each human, for each person, but it is recognizing what are the elements that help you feel your best.
Yeah. So it's a practice of, I often find when I speak with experts such as yourself, they always have something that they do that allows for them to have pause
Mhm.
in some way, shape, or form. And in your case, right, your pause is when I journal, it's like a pause of life, right? I pause it
Mhm.
all and I
Yep.
take inventory, I reflect, I consider what I'm going through. And it seems like there needs to be something like that in everyone's routine. And finding yours is really what I would encourage anybody who's listening to consider, right? What is your version of pause, right? For me, mine is meditation. My fiance, Alex, is huge on journaling. She's been journaling for years. It's like she needs it. She relies on it all. She has like, I forget how many, like 38 40 journals, something like that by now. It's insane how many she's written, but it's just that's hers, right? And it works
Mhm.
for her. So,
Yep.
Becky, what I like to do towards the end of one of these conversations is I always like to ask people to imagine that they're in a scenario where they meet the person in the story. So let's say Lily is at a leadership summit and you're there facilitating. You go through some leadership training or workshop, or maybe it's about burnout. And Lily is inspired by your talk, and she comes up to you afterwards, and she starts telling you her story of what she's going through, and asks for your support. And knowing you would listen, you would acknowledge, you would validate what she's going through, but you wouldn't just blurt out advice, Becky. You would pose a question that would get her to start to consider how she can work through her challenges on her own, or maybe to take some inventory of things. So what would you ask her, Becky?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as I read through Lily's story, and as I can imagine her coming up to me, I almost feel like she's at this crossroads of, I don't really know what I want. So the question I would pose to her, like, what do you want? As simple as that sounds, it's what do you want? And helping her take steps from there. But it's such a simple baseline, just general question for people just to really think through, but it can help them get unstuck and start to take action.
Yeah. And it's something I think you put in one of your articles as well, which is to be forward thinking, to be looking ahead rather than getting so caught in everything that's going wrong, everything in the past, all the things that are disturbing you, is to get through the clouds with a question like that could really evoke a lot out of somebody. So I love it. And so, by the way, anyone listening, I really recommend connecting with Becky on LinkedIn. That's how you and I connected, over LinkedIn. You're posting content regularly. It's great content. And I really think that anyone listening would get a lot of value out of following you. So it's Becky Wolfe, and that's WOLFE, Becky Wolfe. Be sure to check her out on LinkedIn. And from there, of course, there's your website and everything else that people can find you. So Becky, I want to just thank you so much for carving out time today and to connect with me and go through this conversation. I think it was excellent, and would love to have you again in the future.
Thank you so much, Jay. I am completely honored. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
One thing you can sense in Becky is how she genuinely cares about helping people. And I think that's the mark of a great leader and a great coach. And I'll do my best to share what I think are the most powerful insights and actionable takeaways from our conversation. The first insight is the way she broke down what burnout actually consists of. And she had 3 characteristics. The first one was cynicism, or deep personalization. The second was emotional exhaustion. And then the third was decreased efficacy. And she also alluded to how this doesn't have to only be work-related. It could come from home. It could come from any area of life. And how I thought it was fascinating how she broke down over time that will increase that area of the brain, or it makes the amygdala larger, which is the area that perceives threat. And the prefrontal cortex, which is the front area of your brain where you have a little bit more objective thinking, actually will get smaller when you have a long period of this kind of experience. The second insight, self-efficacy. I like how she went beyond just knowing what your strengths are. It's knowing who you are, what you need, and then being able to voice that to others. It's a mix of self-awareness and self-management. Third insight, the importance of psychological safety. You've heard me talk about this before, but I like how her perspective on it, which was that when we feel safe, then the focus on self-preservation is no longer needed, so we can do things for others more naturally. You can walk into work and just be who you are. So the importance of having that kind of environment in the workplace. Actionable takeaways. First one, know thyself. She brought up a few different ways to do that. Core values exercises, personality assessments. She mentioned 5 voices, Myers-Briggs. Those things are meant to help you to be able to know yourself so that you can be more self-aware and manage yourself. Second actionable takeaway. Shift your focus onto helping your team grow. If you are in a leadership position, or even if you're not by title, you are a leader in one way, shape, or form. Yes, you are. And consider, how can I help people grow? You may actually be holding them back if you're taking on all this responsibility and putting it all on your shoulders. You may need to ask them to take on some of that responsibility, which will then help them to grow. The third actionable takeaway, pause regularly. She talked about her journaling practice and how she reflects and asks herself questions and makes sure that she's aligned with what it is that she ultimately wants. And having a practice like that for you, whatever that may look like, is so crucial to your development and your ability to avoid the pitfalls of burnout. Join us in our next episode. I'm going to be discussing 3 of my favorite principles of conscious leadership. Conscious leadership is a term that is referencing being a self-aware leader that doesn't act in ways that only is self-serving. They are able to be more servant leaders. And I already touched on one principle, which was be the captain, not the hero. And I have actually 10 different principles, but given the fact that our Friday episodes, we're going to have them always be short, I'm only going to stick to 3 of my personal favorites that I've learned over the years from my time at Tesla to the research I've done on leadership and the opportunities I've had to lead or coach leaders all over the world. So that'll come out on Friday. That'll be in our Spotify, Apple, or whatever platform that you listen to podcasts on. So until next time, thank you so much for listening.